Tamara Perspectives is a forum that catalyzes knowledge sharing around responsible growth and long-term value creation. We convene leaders and practitioners to exchange insights that inform governance, strengthen business models, and translate into applicable frameworks across industries. This Women's Day edition centers on a critical shift from participation to power. As women's workforce participation and educational attainment rise across India, the conversation must now move beyond presence towards influence. Today, we explore what it takes for women to shape the capital that is allocated, the systems that are designed, and the institutional cultures that endure, moving from inclusion within frameworks to authorship of them. It is my pleasure to introduce Shalini Warrier. With over 3 decades of leadership in the banking and finance sectors, Shalini brings deep expertise in financial strategy, digital transformation, and governance. She is the Chief Executive Officer and co-promoter of Refinance Limited, where she is building a digitally driven institution focused on supporting micro and small enterprises. Previously, as Executive Director of the Board of Federal Bank, she led retail banking and digital initiatives, helping position the bank as a frontrunner in fintech-led transformation. She is also now on the board of Tamara Leisure Experiences. So Shalini, it's lovely to have you. Thank you so much for being here today with us. So while women's participation in India's workforce is rising, we see that capital allocation is still remaining at it's in concentrated levels of power. And because of this, we're seeing that access to income is also not becoming the same as access to scale. So the question is not only whether, as women, we are earning, but whether we are also allocating, underwriting, and directing capital. So on this point, what do you believe does it take for women to move from accessing capital to directing capital?
First of all, thanks for having me here. It's wonderful to be here and do this discussion with you, Shruti. So specifically to your question, traditionally in India, access to finance for women have been through what you call the microfinance route. Self-help groups, joint liability groups have been quite successful in giving access to loans for women. And that's spawned an industry of its own. From a risk standpoint, most bankers will tell you that women borrowers tend to be the more conservative ones, the more reliable ones. So all that is great. And a couple of examples of what I've done in my career in terms of encouraging that. In my current role, for example, we work with a lot of women entrepreneurs and scale them up from what they are, from a small utility kind of capability to something larger. We did some work, for example, in Gujarat with dairy farmers who happen to be women primarily and scale them up. Having said that, these are all, small-sized loans. So they give you a fillip, yes, but they don't really take the woman up to the next level. And they tend to be more rural, semi-urban oriented. You don't see enough of it in the urban economy. And if women have to scale up, then they've got to be in the urban economy and contributing to the urban economy, because India is such an urban country. There, I think there are a few challenges that clearly come across. The first challenge is, while this sounds cliched, I know it's the lady herself or the woman herself. Is she willing to put her best foot forward, and does she have the self-confidence of being able to go across to a financier, to a capital, people who have the capital, and ask for her share of what is due to her? By nature, reticence sets in. They decide they want to get advice from somebody else who's in the family, etc. That's a mindset that's going to take some time to change. The second is, and you and I briefly referred to this, is women don't have enough allies or sponsors. And I mean it in the sense of, yes, mentoring has its role to play, coaching has its role to play, but I think male allies and male sponsors can play a very important role in taking the woman forward and saying, here, you have a great idea, here is a chance, let's work on it. That's the second thing. The third thing is, most of the capital inflows come largely through private equity firms, venture capitals, banks, etc. The truth remains that decision makers on those tables are still predominantly male. And some of it has to start changing for people to be able to understand the value that happens with women on the table and how they can scale up. So it's a combination of many factors that will have to change, starting from the lady herself, demanding her share of thing with her ideas, to male allies and sponsors, to venture capitals having decision makers who are more oriented to understand this. Last but not the least, while I'm not a big proponent of positive discrimination or quotas, I think there is a role in having that in some of this. If we can get to a stage where, whether it's a bank or a venture capital fund or a private equity, saying, yes, we will consciously and intentionally set aside some money to look for those people who have the ideas, the next Nikas of the world, the next, MobiQuicks of the world, and, examples of what women have been able to do, I think that will make a difference. But it's a long journey and will take time.
So you're a fan of the commitment-led approach for these funds and investors to pull people up. Do you think that, do you believe that what we're seeing in consumerism, where women are far more, they're becoming more visible as consumers, right? You mentioned Nykaa, for instance, right? That's predominantly a woman-led consumer platform. Do you see that is being more recognized, explored, understood? Like, how do you feel that is changing?
Clearly, it's becoming a lot more predominant. I think marketplaces, producers, manufacturers are recognizing that women have not just a voice at the table, but they have the buying power and the purchasing power to get to making those decisions. Particularly in urban, it's still not as predominant in semi-urban and rural, but in the urban workforce. So if you look at an Amazon, for example, or a Meesho, for example, they are doing work in the area of ensuring that, they are guiding women on decisions and getting them to be a power to reckon with. So yes, that is happening.
In Tamara, in fact, what we've done is that we've tried to ensure that there are certain milestones, goals in terms of the number of women that are brought into leadership positions. Because in hospitality, typically we do see that women are entering the force, but what happens is as they go up the leadership chain, we have a problem of dropout. And so what we're trying to do is really make sure that we are much more conscious of who is coming into leadership and how can we really mentor them, guide them into those leadership positions, because we believe that within at least the organization, capital allocation should be led by a diverse workforce. That ultimately, there's so much data on how that is a positive thing for an organization. So that's one thing that we're doing.
And I think to expand on that further, moving away from inclusion metrics into, as we say, mobility metrics or leadership-oriented metrics becomes a very integral part, and we can explore it further. But it's so true of STEM. 40% enter the workforce, but if you look around to the top 10 technology companies in India, how many would you see in leadership positions? It just drops off, and therefore moving organizations, exactly what you're doing in Tamara, to say, yes, entry level is great, I have 40% women coming me, or even 60% probably in the hotel industry. To even in banks, I see 40% workforce entering women, but when you come up the leadership position, it goes down. So how do you move the board away from thinking about not just inclusion, but what is the pipeline going up?
I was at CII. I went just a few days ago, the India Women's Network within the CII. And I thought what was wonderful was the program that you have in developing directors. And training up women to be independent directors on boards. Of course, we have this mandate, right, that there must be one woman on every board, but I think to ensure that you have qualified directors, and you of course launched a directors directory as well, and I thought that was such a brilliant thing.
Absolutely, yeah. We've been doing that for 3 years in a row with the work I've been doing with Indian Women Network, and and it's an intensive program they go through, and then they qualify for it. Similarly, there is this organization called Aspire for Her, which is doing work with INSEAD in the same area. So yes, consciously training women, but also opening up opportunities for them beyond being a tokenism on the board. Exactly. Is where we have to evolve to, because, you can't just have a woman on the board just for the sake of meeting a SEBI requirement. How do you make it truly count? And any board that has a diverse mix, you would know more than anybody else, gets the quality of the decisions becomes so much better. The quality of the conversations becomes so much better.
That's true at every level, right? The boards, of course, are setting the mission and sort of setting guiding these organizations. But I think at every level, the diversity is so important and so vital to make sure that the health of the organization and what the organization really stands for is not only just is said, but is also executed at every level. So,
and to add to that, is measured and consciously discussed at the right forums, whether it's at the board, whether it's at the HR committee, whether it's at the nomination and remuneration committee.
Shalini, so we're seeing that digital systems are becoming increasingly important in the way that businesses are shaped and how they're operating, scaling, and competing. And so as a result, technological design has become a very core lever in terms of defining economic power. And the digital divide is not only about access anymore, access to devices rather, but it's also about who's designing those platforms, who's writing those algorithms, and who's owning the intellectual property. So as we go forward and as India's digital economy particularly expands, how do we ensure that women not only have access to using technology, which is of course incredibly important, but how do we also ensure that they are the ones who are involved in designing and governing it?
As they say nowadays, I think businesses like the hospitality, banking is no longer about the core business. It's technology intertwined with banking, technology intertwined with hospitality. That's the way the world is going, and AI is obviously playing a very important role in that. But to come to your question, while this may take time and you need to go to the grassroots. We spoke about the fact that STEM graduates, etc., are coming. But if you look at our education system, Shruti, I still feel that it's still a lot of it is by rote. A lot of it is, they just learn. Even the engineering graduates, for example, I don't know how many of them come out feeling empowered enough to be able to do, as you said, product design or design creative work. They come out thinking, okay, I'll go and join any of the technology companies, or even worse, I see them in banks, doing work at the counter. So I think it's got to start with that. And how do you change the education system to give them opportunities which are more creative in nature, whether it's even as simple as hackathons, creating them to be creative. I think that's where it's got to start. But I recognize completely that that's a long term. It's not going to happen overnight for India. And, if we've got to make advances, it's got to be a lot more quicker in many areas. And that's where I feel, the fintechs can come in pretty strongly. India is home to a very large number of fintechs, and I've had the fortune of working with a lot of them through my stint in banking. But what I notice is, the founders are predominantly male. Even their product designers, etc., are not enough women are coming in over there. So I think some of the positive interventions that have to be done. So, for example, the National Payments Corporation of India, NPCI, runs a program for women in fintech and encourages them to do a lot more product design work, gives them opportunities in the form of hackathons. Reserve Bank of India does work giving them opportunities in the form of hackathons, etc. So how do we make sure women are using those, are aware of those opportunities, using those opportunities, doing the required research to come in and participate in that? So a lot of work will have to be done by these associations like the National Payments Corporation, Reserve Bank of India, in the world of fintech. In the world of consumerism, which is like whether it's in the form of apps, whether it's in the form of UI UX for anything that we use as a daily use, it's got to be the education system that's got to trigger the pipeline into that. The education system's got to change to make it a lot more creative, is my sense, and that's where the challenge lies. Because today people come in with very clear, with a very clear mindset that this is all I know and this is all I will do. I know coding, and we know for a reality that in a couple of years from now, coding is not going to exist. Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that I do think that there is a lot of hope on the education side, at least from the work that I've seen in foundation work and nonprofit work. there are a lot of people who are actually working on this issue and trying to bring more creativity into the leadership within the education system and then within the teachers of the education system, which is hopefully then percolating into the way the students are learning, right? So to ensure that there's more experiential learning, to make sure that there's more industry relevant or like world relevant learning that is happening, or on hands learning that's happening. I do say that in India, particularly because we have such a vibrant social sector, that there is quite a lot of attention going into it. As you said, it is a long haul, right? Because we have such a large population, and to address that entire community of children who are coming up, it's incredibly difficult. But there is hope, I would say, on that front, which is nice to see, in fact. And I think we're seeing also, like, I mean, being in Bangalore, we see such a vibrant entrepreneurial community, right? I mean, there's nothing like it, that I have seen anywhere else. I think that young people here, men and women, are so confident and so gung-ho about the things that they're doing, the projects that they're doing in AI, in other parts of tech, all over. And we do see that, I mean, I personally do see that there are more women today in that space than there used to be, right? So nowadays I've been sitting on, juries and things like that, looking at these entrepreneurial ventures. And it's so amazing to see the women who are coming in, particularly in STEM. Things like hydrogen, like looking at, how hydrogen can be used for energy, looking at waste management. I mean, all kinds of things, right? Like things which are, of course, relevant to us in Tamara and hospitality. But even apart from that, like we're seeing so many different ideas and uniquely approached because of the diverse populations that are looking at them.
And has your experience with them been that they're able to scale up, Shruti? Because that's another big challenge in this industry that I notice.
I mean, I think with young entrepreneurs, there's a mix, right? I mean, I think that, of course, the ecosystem exists to try to make sure that most of them do succeed. But as any sort of entrepreneurial community, most of them don't succeed, right? So either it's an issue of scaling, it's an issue of access to capital.
It's an issue of probably mentorship, sponsorship.
Totally. Yeah, mentorship, sponsorship. So there's several reasons why ideas, even good ideas, fail, right? I think one of the challenges that we see often is just leadership, right? Management skills, not knowing how to manage people and not being able to...
Or manage finances.
Yeah,
because I think that's one of the things women tend to kind of leave aside and say, it'll manage itself, but finance will never manage itself, right?
No. You're right. Actually, in fact, I feel like the managing people comes easier to women. Maybe managing finances does not. And maybe with men, we see it the other way around. And these are all obviously very broad statements. But we do, of course. I mean, you do see reasons for why these things don't succeed. But you do also see many of them doing well. And so that's a very heartening thing, I think, to see a community of people trying, right? Even if they fall, it's okay. Like they're trying. But I do see, my point with this was that I do see a level of confidence in these young women who are coming out of college, which I don't think existed before. So I'm very hopeful of the future in terms of, their inclusion into places of power where we're defining how the algorithms are written and, how the data is consumed and everything.